Hello, and welcome to UX Insiders, a live event hosted by the UX Design Institute and featuring contributions from the most interesting and most creative people in the UX field. In the UX Design Institute, we aim to deliver world-class education to the next generation of UX professionals. With our live events, we aim to bridge the gap between education and industry for budding designers by talking to some of the best people working in UX. And it can't get any better than Morgan Shin. Morgan is a product designer working at Meta in virtual reality, and her professional journey is a really interesting one and one I'm sure a lot of you will connect to. She transitioned into the field of UX 3 years ago after working as an elementary school teacher. She got her master's degree in human computer interaction from Georgia Tech and started working at Meta just after she graduated. Outside of work, Morgan is passionate about virtual reality and increasing diversity in the tech field. On social media, she documents her journey into technology, raises awareness around VR, world building, and shares tips for people transitioning into tech. So Morgan, we are so excited to have you here today, and the response to this event has just been so positive. And to everyone watching at home, there will be plenty of time for a Q&A. So I'll ask anyone tuning in to please type any questions you have for Morgan in the questions panel, and we will run through them throughout the event wherever they are suitable. So if you see a question that you would particularly like to hear the answer to, upvote it and let us know which ones you want to hear. So Morgan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here. I have been looking forward to this for a while now, so thank you.
So we're all like the word virtual reality, it just gets people so interested. And your career, your journey is so interesting as well. And I know you've prepared a short presentation from how you started as an elementary teacher and now work with Meta. So would you like to dive into that straight away?
Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead and share that. I'm super excited to share with you all a little bit about my journey, and I will start that now. So, hi everyone. I'm Morgan. Super nice to meet you. Today I'm going to be talking about the UX of VR. And so, we're going to go over just an introduction about me. I'll talk a little bit about how you can break into virtual reality, the role of UX in VR, and then we'll have our Q&A time, and I can't wait to answer all of your questions. So, a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Morgan. Hello. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, originally, and I am based in Los Angeles, California. I'm a product designer at Meta in virtual reality. And so we have a lot of different products at Meta. We have Instagram, we have WhatsApp. We also have virtual reality, and that's where I work in the Horizon Worlds team, which is our metaverse product. And I also am a VR world builder on the side. It's a really fun hobby of mine. So you might see that if you follow me on social media. A little bit about my journey. I actually did teach elementary school for 3.5 years. So back in 2018, 2019, that was my last year as an elementary school teacher. And in 2019, I started my master's degree at Georgia Tech in HCI. And while I was there, because it was a 2-year program, I did an internship at Meta, never thinking that they would respond to me when I applied. And they did. So here I am. I loved the internship. It was actually my first time putting on a VR headset was during this internship. I loved it so much. I got a return offer. So I returned in 2021 in the summer and started working full time in Meta. And in later 2021, I started building worlds in VR. And so I wanted to put that there so that you know that I have not been doing this my whole life. I have not been building worlds in VR, nothing. I had no clue this was even a choice. So I hope that encourages you to know that this is something that you can dive into. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you would start, exactly how you can break into VR. So as a product designer, what I do on the virtual reality team is I focus primarily on designing for the 2D surfaces or the UI, user interfaces, inside of the product I work on, which is Horizon Worlds. But it might not always be a 2D surface. It's possible that I could be designing something like a 3D object or object interaction, some type of animation, something like that. But mostly I focus on the user experience inside of the VR product. A lot of traditional 2D skills really do transfer over to VR, but there are some new things also to consider. So if I had to start all over again, to break into VR starting today, this is what I would do. And I'm going to walk you through step by step what you can do, even right after this call, if this is something that you're interested in. The first thing that I would say is start by learning about virtual reality. You can read articles, you can read books, blogs, YouTube videos, anything that you like. It just really helps you to build a foundation about what virtual reality is all about. It helps you understand similarities and differences between VR, AR, and XR, and also gives you context of the history of VR, how we got where we are, what's been tried, what works, and maybe what doesn't. After that, I would spend time in a virtual reality headset. I would get one, I would play games, I'd use the web browsers, I'd hang out with friends. To really understand what VR is like, you have to actually put the headset on and immerse yourself in virtual reality. You can also do this by spending time in AR as well as in XR experiences. Try different things and pay attention to how these different apps are the same and how they're different. Maybe compare and contrast VR with AR and just have a good time. Have fun, play around, enjoy yourself. All of this together really helps you build knowledge of VR. It gives you references to pull from. So in the future, when you start designing, you can go, oh yeah, that app that I used way back when, they solved this problem this way. Or these two apps do this interface this way or this interaction that way. And it's all building on your knowledge and gives you things to pull from. The next step that I would follow is to then start paying attention to how user interfaces are designed in different VR apps. So if you want to be a UX researcher in virtual reality or a software engineer or just something different, you might follow a different path here. But for those of us interested in UX design or product design, start to look at UI interfaces. Ask yourself questions and take notes. So in different apps, I might ask myself, how is the UI designed? Why is it designed this way? What interactions and micro interactions do I see? And what parts of the UI feel interesting, fun, or exciting? And I would write all of that down. After that, I would pay attention to pain points. So I'm going to go back through and also take notes about what is working, what doesn't work, what feels frustrating. I might even look online and see what are people saying about this app? What is confusing to them? So for me, I would go back and I'd look at what part of the UI feels broken, what part feels confusing, what maybe feels like something is missing, and how can I improve this experience? After completing those first 4 steps, repeat again. I would say do that over and over, cycling through those first 4 steps as much as you possibly can. Choosing different kind of apps, try co-watching experiences, try different types of games, social apps, fitness apps, etc. And really take the time to build an understanding of how VR apps are designed and why. I would say typically that there's not as many hard and fast rules for designing in VR like there is in 2D because it is newer. And so you learn a lot on the job or as you go. And by doing this, you can come in with a lot of knowledge. And then I'd move on to the next steps once I feel comfortable teaching what I've learned to someone else or just explaining it to someone and I feel comfortable about that, then I would move on. So after I've done all of this, building my foundation, really understanding the world of VR, I would start creating. Now is that time to jump in. You're going to pick one small pain point from step 4. And I would say small, guys. Never start designing an entire VR experience. It's really overwhelming. Do an existing app with a really small pain point, like how do I add a friend? That can be a small thing to start with. And using that existing app is also really great because it forces you to work in predefined constraints with the design system, both of which are really important for my day-to-day work. I never can just jump in and like design whatever I want to. I can't do that. I have to think about technical constraints. I have to think about, hey, does this fit into our design system, even if it's a new UI pattern or interaction? You might also need to be thinking about performance. Is this going to slow the headset down in any way or make loading times really long? So once you've done that, return to other VR apps that you also spend time in, but now re-examine those through a different lens. So really thinking about, how do these apps solve for the pain point that I picked in the previous step? So for example, if you want to do how to add friends and how to make that with less friction, maybe you go into something like Rec Room, which is seen here, and you think about, how are they solving for adding friends? How is it similar to or different from something like VR chat? What's working, what's not working, and what seems to be that standard pattern of design across multiple apps for how to do this feature or flow of adding a friend. From there, I would start by sketching some ideas, as many as possible. Do not limit yourself, go wide with ideas for how to solve for that pain point, and then move to your preferred design tool to start building out that experience in higher fidelity. Try to push yourself after that to make a prototype of whatever this could be in VR using something like Unity or ShapesXR. ShapesXR is really, really cool. It lets you simulate creating a real world prototype by adding in images or just finding ways to kind of build out what you have. It's not going to be perfect, but it will get your idea across and help you to simulate or Wizard of Oz your prototype. And it's great if you don't know how to use Unity. And if you want, you can learn Unity and you can maybe learn to code or use visual scripting if you don't want to code, which is what I do. So from here, I would lastly say share your feedback. Share your prototype with people to get feedback. Maybe think about who your target audience is for this app and the pain point you picked. Show it to them, ask them to try it, and take note of their feedback. And a bonus would be you go back to your design and update it based on the feedback if you want to do something extra. After that, I would repeat the next steps, 5 through 8, all over again. I would just keep going back and forth, pick a different app, pick a different pain point, design a solution. Just keep doing that, and your knowledge is really going to build. It's really going to grow. And if you want to, and you feel confident there, maybe try solving even bigger problems or creating like a really small app with a small team of people, like a researcher, a product manager, an engineer. In this field, you're rarely going to build anything alone. So it's really great if you can show, hey, I can collaborate with others. Look at this project I did with this small team of people. And if you actually want a career out of this and you're going through this and you're like, wow, I love this, then I would say pick your best solutions, your best pain points, add them to your portfolio as a case study, and use that to help you find a job in the field. You don't want to add everything, but just pick your best work. So overall, I just want you to walk away having confidence, knowing that working in VR is actually an achievable goal. Be patient, keep practicing. I did not know where to start when I found this field. I kind of had to fumble through this or fall into things. And so I hope by following those steps, it gives you kind of a more focused path into the field. And I hope that that's helpful. And the last thing I want to talk about is just the role of UX in VR. So kind of what does a user experience designer or product designer do in VR, and what role do we play in this whole process? You might not be surprised to find that it's actually very similar to what you're going to do in 2D. So for example, one thing you are is a user advocate. So what we're doing, just like in 2D, is speaking up for our users. We're making sure that we're building features that they actually need and that solve pain points. And we're helping our team push through that factor or that urge to just only build really cool things. So we're going to take our prototypes, our designs to users. We're going to get their feedback on things, or we're going to get feedback on products that are already out and use those ideas to help us understand what they need. We want to make sure that the features we're designing solve actual pain points found in research by our UX researchers, or they're validated by data presented by our data scientists. As a lot of you know, it's really easy to just do something really, really cool and really fun, but that's even more true in VR because there's so much you can do. You're in a 3D immersive space and your mind goes crazy when you start thinking of, what could I add to this experience? But as a product designer in this space, my job is to keep the team really focused on identifying user needs that are real and that are coming from research. And then once we figure that out, we can think of cool ways to solve those pain points. And the last thing that is another thing to think about, my role is also to be a quality advocate. So I'm focusing on making sure my designs are implemented to uphold a certain quality bar. So I'm working with engineers, I'm working with PM to push for quality and make sure that the implementation of the designs are actually matching or really close to what I had imagined when I built them, even if that means pushing to delay the release. There's that balance there of making sure that you're putting things out with quality and trying to hit that deadline, and it can be really tricky. We also do work with design prototypers, and so they'll build prototypes of our designs that we can test with users, and just make sure the idea is really clear to the team of how this will interact and work in a 3D space before engineers start building it. We really want to make sure that we don't make people sick, confuse them, or frustrate them. But we also want to balance that out with delight and designing fun interactions. So those are the things that I just really quickly wanted to share with you all before we jump into Q&A. I really appreciate you all being here. And if you want to just keep up with me or the content I share, as far as world building, transitioning into tech, or working in VR, you can follow me on any of my social medias. And yeah, let's jump into the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Just Vanessa there asked if you could possibly repeat the name of the VR XR tool that doesn't involve coding.
Yeah, it's called Shapes XR.
Shapes XR. Brilliant. I thought that was very interesting that you never wore a virtual reality headset until you actually started at Meta. So I think an interesting thing for us to get to know about everybody watching is if everybody could answer in the chat what their level of experience with VR is, so that we can just kind of see how present VR is and also how present it's going to be. And kind of following on from that is, how soon do you think VR will become a daily part of our lives, Morgan?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I am no futurist, so I cannot tell you the exact answer, but I feel like it's not going to be maybe this year or maybe next year. I think we do have still some work to do to make sure that, first off, VR headsets are accessible and affordable to everyone. I think that's a really big thing that we need to keep working on. And then we also have a lot of people who still get nauseous or motion sick when using headsets. So that's something that we also need to be thinking about, how we can improve. So I think it's still a few years off before it's like an everyday type of thing.
Yeah, so our responses here are, a lot of people have had no experience whatsoever. They've had some, just one or two kind of games. Some people said that they've walked with dinosaurs, the usual.
Nice.
Quite a lot of people have asked, what would you recommend, what kind of VR experiences would you recommend for people to kind of try out first?
That's a good question. So there are some interesting, like, just games, right? And then we also have immersive experiences where you can just sit there and watch. There is one, I'm trying to think of the name. So there's this immersive experience about the situation that happened in Hawaii where they got these text messages that I think like a bomb or something was coming. And you just go through people's emotions. And I can't remember what it's called. It's like the day something, but if you Google it, you'll find it. It's really good. I also recommend games. So the Room VR, A Dark Matter is a really good one because it's kind of like a puzzle game, but you can see how you can interact with different pieces that are 3D objects. And then I also recommend social experiences like Horizon Worlds, VR Chat, Rec Room, to kind of see that social VR experience as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I'd like to know just a little bit more about why you chose to get into UX, because switching from education to UX, it's actually quite a common switch that a lot of people make. But I'd love to know, what was it that first appealed to you about UX?
Yeah, good question. So I have always wanted to do something that's analytical as well as creative, and I could not figure out what that thing was. Like I would spend so much time searching and looking, and I had an uncle actually call my husband and say like, "Hey, she would probably like UX design." And I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of it. And then I watched YouTube videos and I was like, wait a minute, this is exactly what I've been looking for, because I can do research, I can analyze the research, I can change that into designs, I can design these really cool things and solve problems that people have. And it sounded like just the thing. And so when I decided to apply for grad school, I had to make a portfolio. And in making that portfolio, that's when I knew, I was like, oh, yeah, this is the thing I've been looking for. And I've been sold ever since.
And how far into your time at Meta was it until you started working with VR?
So I actually started working with VR at Meta, if that helps anyone to be encouraged. So I applied for the AR VR internship, having made like 2 AR experiences, kind of. Um, and I didn't think they would respond because I'm like, I have no experience, but I'm just going to apply and like apply other places. And they did. And so my first time was putting on my headset the first week of my job, and I was just like, whoa, like this is amazing. I was blown away and just kind of fell in love. And so I learned a lot on the job through that summer at my internship.
Yeah, so what was that learning curve like? Did you have to take on any additional courses or were you just learning on the go?
Yeah, so one of the AR experiences I made beforehand, at that point, it was kind of like winter when I got this internship, and so I knew it was coming. So I did take a mixed reality class at Georgia Tech my second semester right before my internship, and that really helped me just kind of learn more about the history. We read a lot of articles, learned more about the just some of the process, the design process, get my feet a little bit wet. We did a lot of like WebXR, and then a lot of stuff I learned on my own. I would just find random articles, random videos to watch and learn. I would watch people design things online and kind of learn from that. And then I would learn a lot from my teammates at work. I would see their design process. I would listen to how they were thinking about things when they were making things, and I would absorb all of that.
So what would an average working day look for you now? And like what would be your main roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, there is no average day. It's always so different. I guess I can give you like a summary though. So I could be meeting with my team, and in that meeting, we're kind of talking about what features we're working on, the progress of those features, any like team announcements. I might be meeting one-on-one with people in which we're just catching up on work we're doing. We're asking each other questions. We're making sure that the feature we're working on together is progressing really well. I might be spending time designing. So that is me literally in Figma, heads down, like trying to figure things out. I spend time in my headset for multiple reasons. So one, I spend time just in our product, trying it out, playing games, kind of looking to see how everything's working, what's broken, how's it feeling. We also test features there. So we will go in and we have this, say, this feature that's launching in a few weeks. We'll go in and we'll test it and make sure that it looks how we'd like to. And then I might have like just kind of different team meetings. So there's product team meetings, there's like design team meetings, and just things like that is kind of taken up most of my day. It varies though, but it's a variety of those things throughout the week.
And just to give us an idea of who it is that you work with on a day-to-day basis, what would be the other roles that you would have to deal with regularly and create design handoffs for?
I work with software engineers, product managers. Okay, let me start one back up. Let me start this by saying on a VR team, especially at Meta, you're going to have a larger team than what you would be typically used to. We have a lot of specialists. And so now I work with software engineers that are front end and back end. I work with product managers. I work with data scientists, UX researchers, technical artists, UI artists, 3D artists, design prototypers, um, I'm probably missing some people. A lot of different people in marketing and communications. Um, Sometimes we'll have technical program managers, we'll have design program managers. So there's a lot of different people who are all like on this team helping to make everything run smoothly. And so it's a bigger team than anywhere I've ever worked previous to Meta.
Yeah, it really sounds like it's all hands on deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fun though. I really enjoy because it seems like everyone is an expert at their thing. And so it's just cool to see the feature pass through the process and back and forth and everyone kind of contributing their ideas, and people have really great ideas.
And just in the 3 years that you've been working in VR, how has the pace changed in terms of creating proper virtual reality experiences?
So I would say for me, my pace has increased. So when I first started, I was working pretty slowly because I was just trying to understand what was going on. I was trying to figure out, as an intern, how should this be designed? Why? Like, what pattern should I be using? What is the design system for this feature? Now it's kind of second nature. Like, I know the design system in and out. I know, like, how the feature works, the product works in and out. And so I can quickly come up with a bunch of solutions, kind of narrow it down, go through different feedback loops, go to different design critiques, and get to that final idea a lot faster than I could before. So now I'm just kind of like working really quick.
We have a few questions here about design tools. So we have a question from Amal who asks, are there any standard industry tools used for the UX of VR like Figma, Sketch, or 2D UX?
Yeah, we actually do use Figma. We did use Sketch. We now all use Figma. And just like you do on 2D, you're using Figma to kind of simulate the VR experience, especially when you're first designing. You can also use Figma to prototype a lot of things. And then as far as prototypes go, we have an internal tool we use to kind of prototype things. We also have Unity that a lot of people use to kind of get it in there and see how it will work and send it to your headset. I think those are the main three that we use.
And I'm going to ask a question that I'm very proud of writing, which is, how did you wrap your head around designing with a 360-degree canvas?
Yeah, that is really tricky because when you're moving into VR and into 3D and, like you said, 360, you're thinking about spatial now. Whereas before you're just kind of thinking of like a flat surface. Now you're thinking about, where is this sitting in front of the person? At what angle is this going to be and why? So that is the biggest thing. Like, how far away from the user, and when it is that far away, what does it look like? What can they see? What can't they see? So you have to think about all of those things. You also have sound in a different way, I feel like, than you would have on your phone. It just feels more immersive. So how can you leverage sound? So we also do have a bunch of sound designers who help with all of the sounds that are in Horizon World as well. So you're thinking about a lot more things spatially when you're moving into 360 or 3D.
That's amazing. I didn't even consider sound and how that would
Yeah.
be. Maggie asks, what UX frameworks do you use for XR design?
Yeah, so I think for me, okay, there's like the traditional research frameworks, traditional research methods that are actually used by UX researchers. So at Meta, we kind of are split off. So in some companies, a product designer or UX designer would do both research and design. I personally just do design and I take the research for them. So they're going to do a lot of those, traditional things. For me, I'm using usability principles, I'm using heuristics, all of these things that you would traditionally learn in school. You're not actively thinking like, let me Google the usability principles, but you get to a point where you just kind of know. And when you're designing, you're thinking about it, you're looking for these things. And if you miss it, when you bring your work to design critique, a lot of your teammates are pointing out. And they're not saying, well, by Jacob's law, XYZ, but they are pointing out specific things in your design that's basically what they're saying. So we do use a lot of those things that you learn in school, but we might not be like exactly referencing this principle or this heuristic or something like that.
Okay, brilliant. And then we have a question here from Vanessa who wants to know how much knowledge on XR tools do you need to break into the field?
None. You need none. You don't need any. I did not have any, especially for internships. They're expecting you to learn and grow, and they're expecting you to come there with just an excitement and an interest in VR. I would say if you're looking for full-time jobs, I wouldn't have none. I would definitely try to learn a little bit about the tools, learn a little bit about Unity, because you have to think you're competing against other people for the same job and you want to stand out. So you can have none, but there might be someone else who has experience in Unity or something like that. So I would definitely take the time to learn it. You don't have to be perfect at it, especially at a company like mine where the prototypers are really doing a lot of the prototyping. Designers do prototype, but that's their main responsibility and their role. But being familiar with these programs, being able to say, hey, I did this XYZ thing on my own in Unity would really help as well.
Great. And we have a question here from Milan who asks, what are the types of UX roles that you can take before you get into the UX of VR, and that will make it more likely for you to get into this segment of UX?
Any type of UX jobs you can find. So if you can find you're doing user experience for 2D like mobile or web, tablets, literally anything, just having any experience is going to teach you a lot about, yes, about patterns that we use, but also about the typical workflow in a company. Because I know coming from school, that was my biggest shock is like, you learn this long process and the circle and the double diamond and all these like processes, but when it comes time to actually working, you might not always have time to do all of those things. And so you have to learn when to do certain steps and when to move faster and skip certain things. And that's really hard to learn in school. So any experience you can get that teaches you when to move faster, that also teaches you to collaborate with a team of PM, a team of Eng. It's not just you, the designer, making this cool app that actually can't be implemented because it's going to slow people's phones down. You need that type of experience. So anything you can take would be helpful.
And we have another great question here from Maggie who wants to know if you have any good resources to learn about spatial design, because Maggie finds that the better you understand how objects scale in relation to each other, the more depth your designs have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So first, I don't have any specific like read this book, read this article, but I will say because we have a lot of stuff within our team. But what I would do is, like I said, definitely spend time in VR because you're gonna start to get a feel for it. The more apps that you use, just kind of like with your phone, you start to understand why maybe the bar at the bottom is where they'll put the likes button and the home button because your thumb can reach it. You'll start to get an understanding of that kind of stuff the more you spend in apps. And then I would just search, like look on Google what type of articles you can find, what type of YouTube videos you can find that will talk a lot about spatial design when you're thinking about VR and the do's and don'ts.
That's I find quite interesting because when we think of all of the comments that people have left here saying they have close to no experience with VR, when you're working in VR and you're seeing the full range of abilities that VR can do, how do we prepare people for VR? Like, how do we know when people are ready for VR?
That's a good question. I don't know if there is like a moment where you're just like, I'm ready to go, but we do have some things you think about as a designer when you are designing experiences. You always want to think about people who are going to be newer, who have maybe never put on a headset, and then people who are more seasoned. And so one benefit for you all who have minimal experience when you do join a team, and maybe you're newer to VR or newer to that app, you're going to come with a fresh perspective that the team doesn't have because they're used to seeing it and using it and they're kind of deep in it. Whereas you can take a step back from a brand new user and be like, hey, this actually doesn't make sense. Some things that we specifically do, there are some issues with motion sickness. And so a lot of apps will give you options for how you move. So you'll have teleport versus slide. And so maybe people who are a bit newer to the app might use teleport that just kind of jumps you forward in space versus slide that moves you. Some apps have like a black circle that kind of makes you just focus on one area. when you're moving or when you're building something to help with that. We also think about how we can use raycasting to kind of eliminate people needing to move a lot as well. And one suggestion I would have is just start off with shorter periods for your play session. Just short periods of time and kind of get your VR legs, as they call them, and spend more and more time each session in VR, and that will help you too. It takes some adjusting, and even for me now, there's certain like apps that I can't use because even still they make me a little nauseous. So that just might be the case for now.
And is it a case that maybe all people will just have a different level of kind of coping with VR?
Yeah, typically that is what it is, and the more time you spend in it, the more you'll get used to it.
We have a question here from Eva who wants to know what VR headsets would you recommend for a user designer who's just starting out in AR and VR?
The cheapest one that you can get. I always say, because we don't want the price of headsets to keep you away from being able to be a part of this space. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, is making sure that it's equitable, accessible to all people. The cheapest headset that you can afford is the one that you should get, and start there. And, as time goes on, maybe you save up more money or you're able to buy maybe a more expensive headset. For me personally, I use the Quest 2 and I'm perfectly fine with that. Maybe one day I'll buy multiple headsets or, just different headsets. But for now, I just use that one. And I would say whichever thing you can get your hands on. And if you can't get your hands on a headset, maybe you explore WebXR or WebVR and how you can use your Chrome browser to do VR experiences. Anything you can do to get started.
And we have a great question here about documenting your designs for developers. So what would be your documentation process?
Good question. I use Figma, like I said. So a lot of design handoff for those designs that are in those 2D surfaces are going to be in Figma. And so we're going to be providing them, we call them specs. So basically the spacing between this part and this part and the size of this picture versus the text that might be marked out for them to know, this is 12 pixels, this is 10 pixels, or this is 8 pixels. What grid are you using? Those types of things. Now, typically when you're working with a company that has a design system, a lot of that stuff is already predetermined and laid out. But as you're making new features, which happens a lot in VR, you will need to let them know about spacing, sizing, things like that. And I use my Figma to communicate with that with them. And then I'll also have meetings where I'll share my work with the team, or I'll sit with the engineers and explain it and just kind of walk them through it to make sure they don't have any questions.
And we've a few questions here about prototyping as well. So I imagine prototyping in VR would be a very different experience to people who are prototyping in any other UX design experience. So we've one question from Connor who wants to know, how do you do early stage prototypes of VR experiences? As in, before you've invested massively in building the experience, how do you test out a prototype of that experience with users?
Mm-hmm. So what you can do is, like I said, go into VR and build it. So in Horizon Worlds and Shapes XR, in Quill, there's lots of different programs you can use to actually simulate your design. And then they can just put your headset on and test it out. That's one option. Or you can go into Unity, like our prototypers will do, and they will build the prototype. They might not build the whole environment. So maybe you build and they're just on a white plane with no sky and it just has the UI, and that's totally fine, because the point of it is whatever it is that you've designed, whatever that UI is, getting it tested by your users. So you build just very simple prototypes to get the point across, that you can do quickly, iterate on quickly, and put in front of users. And then when we feel like, okay, this is validated, we have good research, we have a green light, we should go, that is when we'll put the heavy time and investment into actually implementing it.
And we have another question here about the development stages as well, or in the planning stages, sorry, where it is, what is the process for planning and storyboarding a viewer experience? What do you use for that stage in the design process?
That's a good question. This is my question where I go back to saying a lot of things in VR are actually very similar to 2D. I think we always think that there's this huge difference, and there really is not a really huge difference. And so I'll do the same things where I will start with the research and I'll do like a user journey if it's a brand new type of thing. If I'm just adding to an existing feature, I might not do that, but I'll do kind of the user journey map. I'll talk that with my team. I might do storyboards just the same way in Figma, or I draw them on my iPad just the same way that you would in 2D. From there, I start to, share those early sketches with teams, and I will move into like making higher fidelity versions in Figma, trying to prototype it and Wizard of Oz it to see if we can simulate that experience. And then from there, we have some internal tools we can use to basically check it out in our headset. We might hook up with some prototypers, and we might kind of use them to help build that experience out in the headset, test it out again. So it's kind of like that similar process to what you would do in 2D, except now you're adding in the Unity part because you'll need to test out it in a 3D space.
We have a lot of questions here about accessibility. So I think a great one that actually covers all the elements that people want to know about accessibility in VR is, how do you ensure that you are designing for diverse user types?
Yes, this is a really, really good question. So, to be honest, I feel like VR still has a long way to go to make sure that it is actually accessible for all people. I just think we're not there yet. And it's kind of sad. And I think that's something that we could definitely improve on. Some things that we do when we're developing products is thinking about, first off, the risks that this might have for different groups of people, how this might affect different groups of people, if this actually is inclusive of different people. Are we leaving anyone out? Are we testing it with different types of users? Are we thinking about people who might be sitting versus standing? Those types of things. Are we checking our color contrast when we're making designs and putting text on top of panels? We're thinking about a lot of those things similarly as to 2D, but we also have to think about people's positions, if they're sitting or if they're standing, if they have the ability to use both of their hands versus one. These are all things that need to be considered, and I feel like there's still a long way to go. Also making sure that you're representative of all people. So when you're making avatars, do you have hair that looks like mine? Do we have hair that looks like yours? Do we have different sizes of the avatars? Just different things like that are all really important. And we have a lot of people thinking about those things. But when you're designing for your experiences, definitely make sure to think about that. And if you do put your process in case studies, call out how you thought about accessibility and the things you did for that.
That's really good advice, and I think anyone working in any area of UX design can think of that as well. So that's excellent advice. We have a great question from Vanessa, who is kind of joking when she asks this, but it's also a good question.
Yeah.
From a technical perspective, do you think that there's a possibility of experiencing VR or XR without wearing a huge box over our heads?
That is funny. I hope so. I really do, because I know, like, for me, after being in headset for a while, my head starts to hurt because it is a bit heavy. And I don't know the answer to that at all, but I really do hope one day that that is something that could be possible. I love seeing those movies where they have just like the holographic people come up or on the wall in movies. That's really cool. It would be really cool if that happens one day, but I don't know.
This actually links up to some brilliant questions that we have here. One is from Tim, who wants to know about, away from gaming, how much do you see the future for business use? For example, kind of experiencing products, say like physical shops disappearing from the high street, or like what do you think will happen in terms of retail and virtual reality?
So my prediction, I do think that a lot of businesses are going to go and try to get into this space, get into VR, get into the metaverse, and start bringing their businesses there. I'm not sure if things will disappear. It kind of makes me think of books, for example, right? Like we had the libraries and we had physical books, and then we had the digital Kindles come out, and then we had the reading apps on our phone. And so books are still there, libraries are still there, bookstores are still there. But in addition to that, you also have people who prefer to read digitally. So I kind of see it more like that, where maybe there's the option for both. If you want to shop online or in the metaverse, you can do that. Or if you want to shop physically, you can do that. I think that would be a really nice way to kind of complement both. I don't know if I see physical stores just completely disappearing. I don't know if we really, well, for me personally, I don't know if I would want that because I enjoy going to the store. But, you know, you never know. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit like with online shopping. A lot of the time you go online to see what's available, but you need to go and try it on. There is that difference of the experience of actually trying on clothing. So I think that
Yeah.
should be okay. We have two questions here about AI. So the first one is, what crossover do you see between VR and AI?
So for me, I think I'm a world builder. So I would love to see, I know a lot of you guys probably have seen Dolly and how you can have an image and now you're able to erase it and have new versions of the image. I would love to be able to build a world and kind of like build something, and maybe I can like erase it and AI is able to replace it with something else or another version. Or maybe I build an entire world, and like how Dolly has the variations, maybe it can change it to different variations of the world that I built, to get closer to what I'm imagining. Or like if I'm building a town and I have to duplicate the same things over and over and over, can AI just come in and be like, oh, okay, I see what you did here. I'll complete the neighborhood and just like finish it for me, adding different variations of the house I made. I could see some interesting things like that.
That links up beautifully to this question from Ayush, who asks, is there a possibility that in future AI might take over UX?
I hope not. um, and just my personal answer to this would be I hope not, because I think there's a personal aspect to having a person be involved who is able to empathize with people. But I am not an expert in AI by any means. So someone might be saying like, "Oh, actually, AI can actually empathize." I really don't know, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I think there's bigger questions around AI that maybe we don't want to
Yeah.
things to. Great. So another one is, are there any examples of projects that you've worked on that you are particularly proud of?
Oh, yes, I am. So in Horizon Worlds, we have something called Insights, which is for our world creators, and they're able to kind of go in and just see data about how their world is performing. That is actually something that I was able to work on, and there are not really insights kind of dashboards like that in virtual reality. It's a bit new to have it in VR, and I was able to work on that, and it was really fun. And it gets back to my example of being like when I was saying there's not a lot of precedent for designs in VR like there is in 2D. I can't just Google VR dashboard and like all these examples come up like they do in 2D. And so just having to work through that and figure it out, we had to pull a big team of people together to get that out there and to get it right. And I'm really proud of that because I was still pretty new. I worked really, really hard on that. And I think it has been really helpful to creators just to kind of learn about how their worlds are performing, how people are visiting, how long they're staying, different things like that. So if you go in Horizon Worlds and you create a world, you'll be able to see it.
I'd love to know just how much your impression of VR has changed. So what did you think VR was before you started with Meta, and just how different was that impression to what you have now?
Um, I think I didn't really think much about it before starting or before really getting the internship. I kind of was just like, no, I don't want to do VR. Like, I don't really know what that is. I knew that you put the headset on and you would see something. I think I kind of imagined, like, I don't know if you used to have in the 90s where you would have that little like eyepiece and you'd put like a circular thing in it that had different pictures. and you could pull it and it would change pictures. I mean, I didn't think it was that simple, but I'm like, okay, it's got to be something like that. And then when I actually put my headset on, I was blown away because it was so immersive and a lot of it felt so real. A lot of the immersive experiences, you really felt like you were there. The people were actually looking at you, talking to you. I was really blown away. So I was like, wow, this is a lot more advanced than I thought it actually was.
That's incredible. And like, as a designer, how amazed have you been with the growth that you've experienced in just your mindset and your outlook into the possibilities?
Really, really amazed. I've grown a lot really, 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 really fast. In this time period that I've been working full time, I've learned so many things that I feel like you just don't learn in school because you're not on a fully embedded into a product team. So it's just really hard to learn a lot of these things and just learn the reality of like what it looks like to take an idea from this is just an idea or just a user pain point all the way to something that's being shipped. I think is amazing to go through that cycle multiple times and learn the in and outs of how that process works and being able to help move the product along that process. I have just grown so much and I love my job. I love what I do. So I've just been happy kind of seeing things and seeing my progression.
And we have a great question here from Kariba, who wants to know, how long did it take you to feel confident as a UX designer for VR?
How long did it take me? Okay, so I think for me, I would say about a month into my internship, that's about how long it took. And I know you're thinking like, that girl, that is not that long. But the reason why is because I kind of took a different approach with my mindset. And I kind of just chose to believe that like this is something that I could do. Like, okay, I spent this month doubting my abilities, but I'm here. Like I'm in the internship. I received the internship. I can do this. And so I just decided that I was going to. If that meant that I had to watch other things in the evenings or take other classes or just learn on my own, that's what I was going to do. And I spent a lot of time just learning from other designers at my job so that I would feel comfortable. And then when I went back to school, I did my master's project. I did a virtual reality tool for education as my master's project. So I spent a whole year in Blender and Unity, just like learning different things, getting more comfortable. I'm applying what I had learned in my internship so that when I returned full time, I could just hit the ground running. I think there's a separate part of like imposter syndrome that comes up. And for me, it wasn't necessarily like I don't belong in this VR space. It was more so like, whoa, how did I get at this company? Like, are y'all sure I should be here? I don't know. That does take time. I think that took some months for me to be like, okay, you're doing a good job. You got this. You're killing it. You go, girl. Like that did take some time and a lot of reassurance to know that, no, actually, I belong here. And I want you all to know you belong here. And it's easy to be intimidated by people who have been doing this since they were 12. People love to say, I've been drawing my whole life. I've been coding since I was 12. Well, I haven't. I just discovered this a few years ago. And I want you to know that you can do this starting today if you want to, and you can grow and you do belong here. And don't let anyone make you feel like you don't.
And just to maybe speak to a few people who were in the same position you were 4 or 5 years ago, what transferable skills have you seen from your time as a teacher cross over into your UX design career?
The biggest one I would say is my analytical skills. So as a teacher, we kind of follow a very similar process in which we think about what our students need to know or what they need to learn, so their user needs, and we plan a lesson for that. How can we meet those needs? How can we teach them what they need to know? Same thing for VR. How are we meeting the pain points that users have? And you're going through and you're kind of working with other teachers. You're collaborating on like, is this the best way to teach this? Or is this the best way? With designs, you're thinking, is this the best way to design it? Is this? You're working together. Then you put it out there. So you ship it or like you teach your lesson and you kind of observe as you go. You're changing quickly. You're looking at what's working, what's not working. You're making iterations. So you might have to come back the next day and reteach a certain part that didn't work, or you hold on to something and say, oh, this worked really well. Let's do this again next time. It's very similar to VR when you're shipping things and you're like, oh, this is great. It's really working. Or, oh, users are confused. Like, we need to go back and backtrack there. It's kind of crazy how similar it is. A lot of things really do transfer over. And when you're doing tests, like, for example, you're analyzing how students are performing, what's clear to them, what's confusing to them, and you're making changes to your lessons and your plans according to that. And we take similar how people interact with our tools and the data we're having to make assessments of what people need. So it's a very similar process, actually.
Of course, a lot of people watching here are students of UX, and they're very eager to learn just as much as they possibly can. And we have a great question here from Charles, who also went to Georgia Tech, who wants to know which resources, classes, or clubs did you take advantage of while you were in school?
Yeah, so at Georgia Tech, it was a mixed reality class. It was in the LMC, which I think might be digital media now, track. And when I was taking the class, we had the ability to work with architecture students. I don't know if they still do that. They were building like a physical installation, and we were building an AR add-on to that. And I think just working together in that product team really helped. So I took a lot of advantage of that. There weren't a bunch of classes. So another thing that I did that might help y'all is when you're in a class and you're given a project, think about how you can solve that project or issue with AR or VR or XR. So the teacher might not say, this is a VR project, but they might say, hey, your project is to think of a way for women to walk alone at night. Okay, you can totally solve that with AR or VR if it makes sense. It doesn't always make sense, but if it does, use that ability and that project in that class to learn AR or VR through that project. And if you do that through all of your classes throughout school, you're going to get a lot of experience. You will have to teach yourself, right? Like, there was no class that taught me how to use Unity, how to use Figma. You will have to spend extra time on your own learning these things to complete the project, but you do have a good incentive because you got to turn in your work. So you have to learn it, and you have a lot of time as a student. So I would do that if your university doesn't have classes or your program doesn't have specific classes on that.
That's brilliant. And that, I think, as well, with a lot of university courses, the technology is just advancing so quickly that it probably is a responsibility for a lot of students to follow the pace as quickly as it moves.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a question here from Jessica, who wants to know, did you have a 2D UX portfolio when you applied for your internship?
I did. I had 2D UX. One project actually did have VR in it. AR in it. And I did mention that, and I showed that when I interviewed and stuff. And so what they're really looking for internships is that you're showing an interest in VR or AR. They don't want you to be a master. You don't have to have all this stuff, but just showing like, hey, I'm interested in this. I did this side project. I did this school project. I really want to try this out, is really, really helpful. And so that's kind of what I had. And I used my 2D. And they're also looking for just strong 2D skills because, like I said, that does transfer over.
We have a question here from Narul, who wants to know, is it mandatory to have a graduation degree to join Meta? They have enough skills and knowledge and experience, but they don't have a degree. Will that impact their job search or hoping to join Meta?
So I would talk to your recruiter about that. But from my understanding, there are positions that don't require a degree. They're looking more so at your portfolio and your ability to do the work. So if you don't have a degree, and even if you do, spend more time than you think you need on your portfolio getting that right. That's your selling point. Like, that's going to get you in the door. So use that to communicate the skills you do have, the side projects you've done, as much as you possibly can. And you can also put some of those side projects on your resume to show that you have experience as well. And I don't think you have to have a degree in order to be in this field at all.
Okay, that's brilliant. And then one person actually asked a great question, just with your background in education. What do you think the impact of VR will have on EdTech?
Oh, I love this. So, okay, I love this because y'all, I'm still an educator at heart, which is why I was so excited to do this because it's kind of like teaching. But yeah, I feel like VR can unlock so much for education, which is why my master's project was a VR tool. It was for third graders learning to make inferences, and they were able to go in the desert, look for fossils, make inferences. And so what VR can do is extend teaching beyond traditional 2D paper pencil. You can put students into the space on the space station in front of the dinosaurs. You can put them in front of the bugs or whatever the things that they're learning. You can bring the stories out and bring them to life and just really captivate them in a way that I feel like you can't do as much with 2D. And if you're a teacher, you know it's all about engagement. I mean, you have to get up there and tap dance to get the students to really pay attention. And then VR and AR just gets their attention like that. I mean, it's just amazing for them. It helps them to do a lot of hands-on learning. The problem is the accessibility of the devices, right? Like VR is very expensive. A lot of schools can't afford headsets enough for a whole class of students. AR, people might have phones, but they might have different phones. And then you've got to figure out how this phone works with the app versus this phone. That makes it hard. So we have an issue with like accessibility to this technology, but if we could solve that, I think it would do amazing things for students, and you also retain a lot better things that you do. So like we have some things where there are medical students who will practice in VR headset surgeries. Like by physically doing things, you learn a lot more. And so I think it's really necessary. We just have to cross that bridge of accessibility to the devices.
Incredible, incredible answer. Thank you so much. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, which has completely flown by, and I'd like to thank you
I
so much.
know.
Oh my gosh, everyone is just so interested, and we have so many questions. VR just has people so excited, and you've really added to that excitement. So thank you so much for giving your time to us. And for everybody watching, we're going to have our next UX Insiders live event on September 28th. And that will be a day in the life of the product designer from Revolut. So if you liked this, you can find more of our information on our Instagram page and our LinkedIn page. And if you've enjoyed Morgan, which I know you all have, please follow her. She is so entertaining and she's so educational, and she's an absolute asset to Meta. So thank you so much, Morgan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thank you, each one of you, for taking time out of your day to come here. I really appreciate that. And I hope you have a great day.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.